Hi. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Glad to have all of you here. That's enough now. Has everybody been having a good experience the last few weeks? I appreciate everyone stops me in the hallway and validates the work that they've been doing. Some of you tried your first family meetings this week and indicated that it started you into some cooperative problem solving, reduced some stress. I had a teacher who said she got a lot of cooperation this week by trying a class meeting with her young people. Some of you even shared with me how you've involved your kids now in helping earn some of the things they were asking for before, and found almost immediately they respected it more when they contributed something to it. So this week we're into the third of the significant 7. We, in our first session, identified the 3 perceptions and 4 skills that determine how effectively people deal with life. In our second session, we dealt with helping people see themselves as capable. Last week we looked at helping people see themselves as significant and their life as significant. Now we're on the third of the perceptions, and that is the perception that I am not powerless to influence what my life becomes in the face of circumstance. I think some of the things we've already learned would help here when we use the builders that we talked about instead of the barriers. Instead of assuming and rescuing and directing, we can check and encourage and invite people to assistance. That helps and pays off also with their sense of being influential in what goes on. I think when we give people thoughtful, specific feedback about their contributions instead of just generic praise, thanks a lot, thank you for offering that in that situation because, and give them specific feedback, that helps them see that if I go on contributing in those ways, it will influence the way things go. But then we decide in our first session that victims in life tend to reflect this perception in the third area. The teacher kicked me out. The principal suspended me. My parents have grounded me. The bank took my car away. Instead of the healthy perception, because I decided not to make my payments on time, the bank gave my car to someone who would, which reflects a whole different set of understandings about how things happen in life. On this third one, in research, we call this variable locus of control. Where does the person see their life controlled from? Largely external locus of control, fate, luck, circumstance, things will either work out or they won't. That means that everything is beyond me. Totally internal locus of control, I can do anything on this earth because I'm all-powerful. I believe for healthy people, it's somewhere in between, like a continuum. But if that continuum favors, more often than not, I believe I am an agent in what happens in my life, through my attitudes and choices at least, then I'll be less likely to be overwhelmed by circumstance and more likely to take responsibility for where I go. There are a number of things in our society that make it difficult today sometimes to develop a healthy internal locus of control, or the perception that some of the control of my life is within me. I think if we look at societal factors, research shows that the more people watch television, the more pessimistic and deterministic they tend to be about life and events, because they're just a passive observer and unable to step in and influence what takes place there. Some time ago we were involved in a military action in Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield, and many people who had loved ones there watched all day the news. People suggested very strongly, if you have loved ones there, update yourself in the morning briefly and in the evening briefly, and then dedicate yourself to the things that you can influence. Otherwise, you'll end up at the end of the day overwhelmed, pessimistic, feeling defeated by events that are out of your control. We're also finding, too, that in a consumer-oriented society, we were once a producer society, but today we're a consumer-oriented society. The emphasis on television is to make us dependent on other people's services and products to solve our problem. We see a product or service, usually chemical, for almost anything. If you watch even a day's television, you'll see from 9 to 11 ads an hour that show pain, discomfort, lack of popularity, lack of fulfillment, boredom, hard work, all instantly eliminated, not through patience and hard work, but through a magic product or service. Mrs. Olson will tell us that if we are feeling socially unacceptable, get a product that is mountain grown, and things will perk up, if you pardon the pun. Lay that upon people, and they'll comment on what a delightful home we have, what great hostesses we are along the way. I think also there's a danger when it comes to a society in which chemicals can be abused and misused by people of all ages. to emphasize self-medication is the key to everything. Our body has very elaborate systems within it, designed to let us know when we've gone too far. It's helpful to start in childhood when a child comes up to you who's been running, playing hard, neglected lunch, who now has a headache. Instead of saying, okay, take something for it, to spend a few moments saying that headache is your body's way of telling you that you've gone past some limits for yourself. Probably the best thing to do, instead of just shutting off the alarm without checking for the fire, is check around for the fire. See what things you can do to bring yourself back in balance. Let's try eating a little bit and resting for a while. And then if the headache doesn't go away and it gets in the way, we might consider doing something with the alarm itself. That's a whole lot better message than plop, plop, fizz, fizz, oh, what a relief it is. And off people go in that process. Some years ago in a book called In Search of Excellence, a man named Tom Peters said that when you teach people to work for static rewards, passing a course, getting a grade, winning a competition, getting a gold star, a smiley face, what you teach them to do is become increasingly more greedy and self-centered, but also become fixated on getting the reward from someone else. Then they begin to believe the goal of a course is to manipulate the teacher into passing you, rather than to challenge yourself to acquire the resources to do well in that area. In the Nation at Risk report that was written in the 80s by a presidential commission, they said we had gotten so caught up in the goal is to get good grades that guidance counselors were even teaching young people to take easier courses to keep their GPA up. And when the lid finally blew off that, then even your finest, even some of your more mediocre colleges, let alone your finer colleges, today want to know, did your school offer rigorous, challenging courses? And if so, why is there no evidence that you tested yourself out in those areas? They're much more likely today to take a student with a B- average who showed a willingness to challenge themselves over one with an A average who showed a desire to avoid challenges and hard work in order to look good and keep up the appearances. I have a friend who's a recovering behaviorist. Many of you know in today's world we seldom say we're X, just recovering. And he said, in my early psychological training, I was trained to use behavior modification. Give people or give creatures of any kind reward when they did what I wanted, punish them when I didn't. What I've now learned is that teaches an external locus of control. It says comply with the more powerful when they're present, and learn to manipulate systems so that you get an external reward of some kind. He said that was all working fine until we had a little son thoughtfully at midlife. Then it came time to potty train him, and his aim and judgment remained frustratingly poor. Finally, in our desperation, we seized on the principles of behavior modification. He loved M&Ms, and so we put a jar of M&Ms on the toilet. Taught him each time he managed to tinkle in the water, he could get an M&M. So it worked like a charm in terms of cleaning up our environment. Now the problem is he stands in the toilet all day trying to squeeze out the next drop of moisture so he can qualify for another M&M. And we said, now our problem is to get him over his fixation on the self-gratification of the M&M and begin to figure out what to do with the rest of his life that is now available to him now that he's learned some control over himself. So I think researchers now are pointing out that it was probably, in retrospect, a mistake to adopt reward and punishment for raising our children. We found them in rats, and when you use them with people, they tend to act like rats. Many researchers have pointed out that one of the consequences of raising 2 generations of American children on external rewards, gold stars, smiley faces, happy grams, generic expressions of praise or approval, is we have more greed and self-interest among our young adult population today than at any time in any society we've ever studied. We have vast numbers of young people who from the age of 5 on will consider doing nothing for anyone without the expectation of a perk, a bribe, a payoff, or a kickback, and that may have destroyed for this generation the values of charity, patriotism, concern for the poor, the less powerful, the minority, the environment, under a flagrant sea of meism and self-interest that I believe today even is reflected in the highest institutions of the land, where we frequently see people who will avoid doing the responsible thing because it might cost them something in terms of their perks, payoff, or level of approval. I think President Lincoln once said, if you're going to cut wood, you have to make chips. And if you're afraid to let the chips fall for what they'll cost you, you'll never get much wood cut. So I believe what we tend to do when we use these methods, When we reward people, we teach them to go for the reward rather than seek the internal affirmation of having done something that they value. On the downside, even B.F. Skinner acknowledged that he was never really successful in encouraging volitional improvement of behavior or openness to learning using punishment or the threat of punishment with any creature. He said, when I used punishment or the threat of punishment, I got control as long as I was strong enough, but it was at the expense of alienation and a destruction of their integrity. What I did was to teach the creature to accept the dominance of the more powerful when they were present, but otherwise do whatever they wanted whenever they were the most powerful. He said, I actually encourage rebellion, resistance, reprisal, and resentment in thoughtful creatures using those methods, but not respect or responsiveness. What I taught them was, put as much distance between yourself and the possible source of punishment to cut your potential losses, which destroyed the bond of closeness and trust I would need to mentor and encourage them. Never try anything you aren't sure you can handle, because if you mess up, it's going to cost you, and that destroyed the risk-taking necessary to learn to improve. They defined as a good day the day they did nothing that got them punished, rather than when they took the risks of learning something new along the way. Said the third thing it taught them was, when you do something, hide it from those who might judge you, put you down or make you feel worse, and lie to them about it to minimize your potential fallout. And he said that destroyed their personal integrity. We just understand that the word discipline comes from the word disciple, and it means an empowered convert, a willing student. And that would remind us that you can't really do discipline to people. That's totalitarianism and anarchy. You can't do it for people. That's anarchy and a failure to delegate. You can only achieve it with people, and it must be future-oriented and done from the perspective. No matter what kind of mess I find myself in today, once I've done what I can with dignity to set it right, there's wisdom here that would help me learn to do better in the future. That becoming responsible is a process I'm growing into with encouragement, rather than something that I'm subjected to pain or manipulation for, depending on whether I have it or don't have it at this moment. Which moves me to the next dimension. Once we look at the things in our environment that suggest we're powerless and begin to work with those, then how we handle the issue of discipline is real important. I personally believe that one of our worst errors today may be to be strict with our children. Although in research many children say they want parents and teachers to be more strict, when we explain strictness, that's not what they had in mind at all. What they want is for us to be firm, to set reasonable limits. Then through the dialogue we've already talked about, be sure that their understanding is close enough to ours that we can delegate thoughtfully. Then when their efforts fall short of our ideal, instead of shaming them, subjecting them to ridicule, pain, blame, hold them accountable with dignity, and then follow through in ways that help them discover how to do better with that in the future. That's firmness with dignity and respect. Our second worst error, though, I think today, is to be permissive with kids. When you're permissive with people, you let the events rule the circumstances. You have an obsessive desire to be approved of by them. So you end up being a waffle, okay? You got the autocrat on one side that wants to be the ruler, the waffle on the other side that everyone walks over because they're unwilling to stand up and establish a reasonable basis to hold people accountable. When you're permissive with people, you get manipulation, disrespect, laissez-faire attitudes toward life, promiscuity, lack of incentive to achieve. It's only slightly worse than rebellion, resistance, resentment, and reprisal, because one is more actively angry and the other is more passively self-defeating. Those two models are very, very frustrating for people. Probably overall, the most frustrating is to flit back and forth between the two, and then all people learn to do is, hey, wait till the next round and I'll be able to manipulate a more satisfactory conclusion. Why do we do that? How many of you are busy? How many often come home burned out, frustrated, and tired and react to things? You're grounded forever, okay? And then you sober up and become permissive. You look so depressed, why don't you borrow my car? Okay, so what kids have learned is provoke, ignore, manipulate. Provoke, ignore, manipulate, and all that will teach is situational ethics and what Albert Ellis calls stinking thinking. The belief I can just steam along, and somehow if I come up with enough manipulative alibis and good stuff, I can escape being held accountable. Teachers tell us that as class size increases, they must go without special training for more expedient control and manipulation of the group than empowerment and teaching the individual. Or there are things they need to deal with they don't get around to because of the pressures of numbers and time. So we found that as class size doubled starting in 1951 and there was more and more pressure to plow through more and more material, we developed a model at school that was aimed more at control and empowerment. That put pressure on the home. At the same time, two-parent full-time working families, single-parent families with all the commuting and so on had less and less time to do that. So that threw pressure on the media. But look at the message of authority given on the media. Look at the number of times in prime time we show parents and children together, and the parent shows up as a weak, ineffectual, insecure bungler. And the child shows up as a slick, sophisticated little therapist figure, lippily coaching their parents into a happier life. Look at the number of times we show school dramas in which the popular teachers are in league with the students trying to frustrate the administration that are always shown as weak, ineffectual buffoons. Look at the number of times in prime time we show law enforcement officers in their shows setting the law aside when it doesn't meet their needs, engaging in unlawful search and seizure, assault and battery, breaking and entering, confiscation of goods and property, and they always emerge heroic on the other end of the show, giving very clearly the message that laws are just for people too stupid to manipulate them in their favor or in their behalf. But that doesn't convey a sense of consequentiality and agency in that process. So in the midst of the societal messages that undercut this, we are now a generation of people that has to be more thoughtful and clear in how we work with the authority that we have so that it develops from within that sense of ownership. What I really want is a child that can say, if I go on like this, I could ground myself forever. Isn't that exciting? How do you get that way? Well, it starts out like this. When you're setting limits, and I'll just pull an example off the shelf. You're my daughter, and you've just gotten your driver's license. And that's an exciting event, isn't it? But it's also scary at some levels. So it begins, if I'm going to set up an environment that will empower her, we need to get the expectations clear while we're not upset, and then work with her to help her grow into that. So I say to her, dear, this is your first night going out with the car since you got your driver's license. And I know how you've looked forward to it, I have too, but I also have some concern about it that we need to discuss. Because driving is a privilege, not a right, okay? It's got some responsibilities attached to it. And most importantly, we need to discuss how long you'll be able to be out with the car. So I need to know from you what you believe would be a reasonable time to expect you home. Now notice I didn't say, what time should I expect you? That's too much delegation. I'm checking her perceptions that we talked about. What's your perception? She says 5 a.m. Is that possible? And today's 5 a.m., okay? Now I say, I can understand from your perspective that looks reasonable. I was thinking more of 11:30. Okay, if you'd be more specific in what you plan to do, I'll try to allow a reasonable amount of time for that. I listen to it, and I say, okay, I'm willing to give you till 12:30. Okay, she said, well, that's not enough time. I said, exactly, so it wouldn't be wise to try what you're planning in that time frame. See? Let me point out, it's important that you don't raise kids or teach kids in a democracy when they must live in a republic. Thomas Jefferson said, we've given you the republic to save you from democracy, and I hope you'll have the wisdom to preserve it in your kids. In democracy, whatever anybody can get anybody to go along with is your standard. In a republic, many things are set aside, not to be thrown out at the moment because you didn't understand them because of a higher appreciation of the human contract. Technically, the republic guaranteed minorities their rights. It was the popular will of the people that denied it in their practices along the way. I believe as long as I have some legal responsibility for her health, safety, supervision, well-being, it's appropriate for me to share some of that so she can grow, but it's also appropriate for me to draw lines where I'm not willing to move in that direction and just try to do it with dignity. The best part of getting this discussion out of the way before she goes out is we're both relatively lucid and optimistic about the outcomes. Incidentally, I believe it's a mistake for parents to set a very tight curfew for kids, always 11 o'clock, once they get a driver's license. When a driver's license comes along, society says we trust this young person's maturity and judgment enough to authorize them to engage in the most dangerous activity human beings will normally engage in while on this planet. Hurling a 3,000-pound missile around randomly among us, and then we say 11 o'clock. Is it possible logistics could change from week to week? Sometimes when they're driving, have friends to drop off. They need that room. I think you need to start weaning them, because when they're 18, go away to college, you're not going to be able to call many of the shots at all. And it's amazing how many kids fall apart out there when you've kept that tight control. Better to teach them to establish a flight plan that allows them time to do what they're going to do. Give them a chance to work it. Then if they aren't successful in working it, discuss it with them, shorten the lead just a little. You need to give kids enough room, enough rope to get rope burns, but not enough to hang themselves. Important principle to keep in mind. And it would be better to shorten up when they didn't handle it well than to tie it too tight, so they always believed if you give them more room, they could have handled things. So we're trying to set that up now. So I say, okay, I'll give you till 12:30 to do that. Okay, as long as you're home at 12:30, or in the rare event something real acceptable to me comes along and I'm convinced you acted in good faith. You got to allow that little margin in there. You can expect to continue to go out on the basis we've discussed. But if you're not home at 12:30 and there's no extenuating circumstances that I'm willing to buy into, since I'm legally responsible, pay the insurance, all those things, then I will ask you to give up the privilege of going out at all for the next month. Not to punish you in any way, but so you can spend that month identifying all the things you might have been doing if you'd been more respectful of your privileges, and developing a plan to improve at the end of that time. Now, it's real important with children that you set it long enough to pinch them, but not so long you destroy their hope. Kids see time differently than we do. I find that anything over 30 days for a kid up to 18 is like consecutive life sentences. It does nothing to solve your problem, but it destroys any willingness on their part to improve. Pinch them, get their attention, have it over soon enough to inspire them that change would benefit them. Actually, for small children, about 0 to 8 years of age, 24 hours is your max. Try to affirm them personally within that time. Try to limit your restrictions to that time. When they get from about 8 to 12, I find a week is fine. But when a child is still saying, is it Saturday yet? It's clear they don't yet see time in those weekly increments. Then from about 12 years of age on out, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. 3 weeks to a 15-year-old can be an eternity. You can fall in love forever 5 times, be grounded forever 6 times, still go off, in the family car. So, you need to set the time as it reflects for them so that they believe if I pay my dues and work on this, things will open up and benefit me within a conceivable length of time. Up to here, though, I've done all the work, haven't I? Your worst mistake now is to say, do you understand? Remember in our previous session we said when you say, do you? They go, and don't take any responsibility. You don't have a contract. What you want to say now is, okay, just so we're clear on this thing.
Go ahead, please. Hello, Ridgemont. You're on the air. Please turn down your television set. Please turn down your television set. We're getting too much feedback. You've got to cut it off now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. In regard to determinants of policy, the War College, I don't know whether this is too political, but you know very well all of our actions over in the Middle East has got to be oil. I wonder if anybody, I remember when Baker was talking to Saddam's, what's his name,
Tariq Aziz.
Prior to the Desert War, I wonder if anybody realized that Jim Baker, one of his major investments was in Exxon. This can be verified in a book written by a Pulitzer Prize-winning author called Spiderweb. So so our grand strategy there is the protection of oil.
Thanks, caller. Richard Mellington, do you ever talk about these kind of things?
Oh, sure. The Persian Gulf area is obviously of critical importance to the United States and its allies. If I could just briefly mention the Gulf War, I think one of the very important things that President Bush did during the Gulf War was to try and justify our actions, not simply in terms of oil, but also in terms of the principles at stake. And I think that any president that can successfully blend what we might call realism and idealism is in a much better position to mobilize American public opinion behind him. And the American public do not want to go to war in the name of the balance of power, nor do they want to go to war only for ideals. They want to go to war, or at least they will tolerate going to war if presidents can blend these two notions together, as I think Bush and Baker to a lesser degree did brilliantly during the Gulf War.
Our cameras are over at the National War College. Our two guests are Bart O'Neill, who is a professor at the National War College of National Security Issues, and Richard Mellinson. Our next caller is New Paltz, New York. Go ahead, please.
Hello, I'd like to address my question to the professors. New Paltz is not far from Poughkeepsie, by the way. The gentleman on the phone didn't know where New Paltz was, but I'm sure the gentleman from Poughkeepsie does. My question is, it seems that our next major international crisis will probably be in the Middle East again, and the circumstances now are very different. I spent some time in the Middle East, and there's a lot of anti-American sentiment by the Muslim the community in the Middle East, and it seems that Saddam Hussein could possibly marshal that anti-American sentiment and maybe form a coalition where there was none before against the United States. The United States support of Israel, might be used to gain some anti-American support between all of the Muslim nations there. Possibly he might try to form a coalition with the Russians. It seems that this could be a greater problem in the future than it is now, especially since some very prominent Americans have even called for his assassination, which I think is almost obscene. I'd like to comment from these men on maybe a long-term strategy.
Okay, thanks. Bart O'Neill?
Well, it's nice to talk to somebody from New Paltz back home. I think American policy in the Middle East will not be victimized by some type of a homogeneous Islamic approach. I think there are many things that divide the Muslims in the Middle East. The United States does enjoy a good deal of goodwill in many parts of the Muslim world and in the Arab Middle East. On the other hand, we do have our critics over there. And it must be said that the current stagnation, if not regression in the peace process, has made it more difficult. But if we play our cards right, I think that the anti-American sentiment can be contained as it was during 1991. Because after all, in the final analysis, the leaders in the Middle East, whether it's Hafez al-Assad or Hosni Mubarak or King Fahd or whatever, find Saddam Hussein to be a more direct and immediate threat to them in many ways than to the United States. So I think it's a mistake to think about Islamic approach to the United States as somehow being monolithic. It's a very polycentric phenomenon, and we can take that into consideration as we devise a long-term strategy that essentially, if I can give you a quick synopsis, should be pivoting around, I think, several long-term goals that reflect economic interest and security interest, the economic interest being vital. With respect to those goals, I think we need to ensure adequate supplies of petroleum at reasonable prices.
Drunk driver, missing, exploited. What does that do to my objectivity? It's gone. I'm now flying along. Actually, I'm starting my own chemically induced high. Fear, adrenaline, anxiety carrying me on. By 5 minutes to 1, worst possibilities show up. Maybe she eloped with that nincompoop she left here with. Oh, what does that do to your objectivity? By about 1:10, you begin to think in terms of calling the hospital or the highway patrol to see if the state is littered at this moment with unidentified bodies of all descriptions. By about 1:20, you try to imagine the names of every child mentioned in your home since puberty. Okay, so that you can start calling around town, spreading your anxiety like a plague. 1:30, apoplexy becomes a distinct possibility. And just as you're about to spaz out on fear, adrenaline, and anxiety, she shows up. And it would have been better if she had died. Am I right? This is something I don't understand. What should I feel when my worst fears were unfounded? Joy and relief, right? What primary emotion toward this child caused the fear of losing her to be so traumatic? Love. Is that what she's going to experience when she gets home? Okay, well remember, we said support must precede a challenge if you're going to teach. So your most important thing is to get the message of love through so that you can work out the rest. So what do you do with those angry feelings when they come up inside of you? I suggest you get them off your chest so you don't get them all over your face at an inappropriate moment. I believe when you have those feelings toward those you love, express them right away. Just don't involve them in it. When that thought first comes up in your heart that if the world lets her survive, I sure won't, right? Then at this moment, let that surface go into where you wash your face and comb your hair, or comb your face and wash your hair, or some combination of those. Look at that revealing mirror, switch on your brightest lights and let it all out. I work, I slave, I should have had myself sterilized, you know, all this stuff that comes along at that moment. Then when it's finally all out there, look at that and say, is that the way I want to be revealed when this is all over if we survive it? The answer, of course, is no. Then when your kid comes home, tell the truth. It's always most helpful to tell the truth. What is the truth? I'm so relieved to see you home safely. I've been walking around here for an hour trying to imagine all the terrible things that might have happened, and I'm grateful now to see that they didn't happen, because I realized in that time how much I love you and how much that would hurt. But because I worked myself into such a totally irrational state over this, we'll talk in the morning about what this will mean for the rest of the month. And get out of there and go to bed. Now, what does she do in the absence of data? Assumes the worst. Is she sleeping soundly? No, she's anticipating, laying in her room, grounded forever, no dates, no car. By 5, she'll be in there tapping on your door. You awake? No, we're sleeping in here. 7 in the morning, you ready to deal with this? No, dear, I've decided, out of fairness to both of us, rather than rush it now, we'd better wait till I get home tonight. Could that be manipulation? Yeah. Yes, and you must use it. Okay? Remember, so I manipulate you so you grow, we call it therapy. When I manipulate you so you learn something, we may call it training. When I manipulate you to take power from you, we call it manipulation and say don't do it. What we actually do is say the tools of manipulation can be used to empower or disempower, depending on our wisdom in working with them. Allow the person the time to think it through. Then when they get home, you work on it like this. What was your understanding last night of what time I'd expect you home?